December 4th, 2013. Somewhere on a highway outside Mexico City, two men are driving a stolen truck. They don't know what's in the back. They pulled the job hours earlier. A routine hijacking. Unremarkable. Medical equipment. Steel canisters. Nothing that looked dangerous. They probably felt good about it. They had no idea that one of those canisters was already killing them. Meanwhile, the Mexican government is in full meltdown. Hazmat teams, federal police, soldiers gripping rifles in the dark, tearing through the streets of central Mexico. At 3 a.m., radios crackling with overlapping voices in barely controlled panic, because somewhere out there on a civilian road is a loose canister of Cobalt-60, one of the most dangerous radioactive isotopes on Earth. No containment, no warning, just two men, a truck, and an invisible force silently dissolving them from the inside out, while an entire nation scrambled to find them.
Radioactive material in Mexico.
What happened to those men? To understand how this happened, we need to know one thing about Cobalt-60. It kills, not like a bullet, not like a fire. Slowly, silently, it passes through walls, through skin, through bone, and you feel nothing. No heat, no pain, no warning. Just your cells coming apart at the molecular level while you go about your day. Hospitals use it to destroy cancer tumors. Focused, controlled, it saves lives. But unshielded, even for minutes, it causes acute radiation syndrome, nausea, hair loss, internal bleeding, organ failure. The international community classifies it Category 1, the most dangerous radioactive material a civilian facility can legally possess. Mexico had dozens of these machines, aging, obsolete, quietly replaced by newer technology over the years, and when they became obsolete, they had to go somewhere. That somewhere was a junkyard. December 3rd, 2013, a white Volkswagen truck pulls out of Centro Médico Nacional La Raza, one of Mexico's largest hospitals in the heart of Mexico City. Routine transfer, paperwork filed, route planned, nothing unusual on record. The two men driving it were contracted transporters, not nuclear technicians, not radiation specialists. Ordinary men doing an ordinary job, or so they were led to believe, because what sat in the back of that truck was anything but ordinary. Inside the decommissioned teletherapy machine was a small, dense pellet of Cobalt-60, shielded, contained, safe as long as nobody touched it, as long as nobody opened it. The truck stopped for the night in Tepojaco, Hidalgo. The drivers were tired. They parked. They slept. They were gone by morning. Not the drivers, the truck. The men who took it weren't masterminds, not terrorists. They were scavengers, men who knew the price of salvage steel and copper wire, the way you know the price of groceries. To them, this was just a truck, just an opportunity. They drove it into the dark, found a quiet field, and began taking it apart. The teletherapy machine was heavy, industrial, worth something as scrap, so they dismantled it, methodically, efficiently, until they reached a small cylinder deep inside the housing, unassuming, dense, the kind of thing that looks like it might be valuable. They opened it. No flash, no heat, no sound, nothing that told them what they had just done. But somewhere across the city, at almost the exact same moment, an alarm went off. It started with a phone call, not a siren, not a system alert. A phone call, the kind that comes in on an ordinary morning from an ordinary hospital administrator reporting an ordinary missing vehicle. Except this time, someone read the manifest. And in a government office in Mexico City, a man picked up the phone with steady hands and put it down with shaking ones. Within hours, the Mexican National Commission of Nuclear Safety and Safeguards had one directive, one priority, one question that overrode everything else. Where is that truck? Federal police flooded the streets. Military units mobilized. Hazmat teams pulled on suits in the dark. Suits that the men driving that truck never had. Suits that the men who stole it never knew they needed. And in Vienna, the International Atomic Energy Agency received a message from Mexico that stopped people mid-sentence. Find this material now. Not a suggestion, a directive, issued by people who understood exactly what was sitting somewhere on a civilian road, invisible, uncontained, and completely out of control. That morning, Mexicans turned on their televisions to find a government bulletin describing a white Volkswagen truck The language was careful, measured, official, but people who read between the lines felt something cold move through them. Because governments don't mobilize the military over a missing truck. Families stayed indoors. Parents kept children home from school. Strangers on the street exchanged looks that said what nobody was saying out loud. Something is very wrong. The search stretched across hundreds of miles of rural roads. Hazmat teams sweeping fields in timed intervals, stopwatches in hand, counting seconds of exposure, radiation detectors sweeping left, right, forward, hour after hour, nothing. And then they found it. But what authorities would discover when they got there, nobody was prepared for. It took less than 24 hours. They found the truck in a quiet field outside Inviopokstla. Rural roads, empty horizon, the kind of place you drive past without ever remembering. The white Volkswagen was just sitting there, abandoned, still, like nothing had happened. Hazmat teams moved in, slowly, carefully, stopwatches in hand, because the radiation readings around that vehicle were so high that every second near it was a second they couldn't get back. They approached in timed intervals, retreated, approached again. What they found inside stopped them cold. The teletherapy machine cracked open, dismantled, the lead shielding removed with bare hands by men who had no idea what they were handling. The protective housing, the only thing standing between that pellet and the open air, gone. The Cobalt 60 source was not inside. They searched the surrounding field, detectors screaming, and then there it was, lying in the dirt, exposed. A small, dense cylinder that looked like it meant nothing and had already done everything. The relief lasted about 30 seconds, because investigators now had one question. How long had it been open? Who had been near it? And where were the men who touched it? The answers came faster than anyone expected, but the damage was already done. 5 men showed up at hospitals across Mexico City within hours of the pellet being found. They didn't arrive together. They didn't know what was wrong. They came in confused, nauseated, the kind of sick that doesn't feel like anything you've felt before, the kind that starts quietly and then doesn't stop. Doctors recognized it immediately. Acute radiation syndrome. They were admitted to Manuel Gaya Gonzalez Hospital, one of the only facilities in the country equipped to handle what these men were carrying inside them. Not a virus, not an infection. Something that couldn't be treated with antibiotics or surgery. Radiation does not burn you from the outside. It unravels you from within. Their doses were significant, serious, the kind of exposure that doesn't leave when you walk away. It follows you home, into your cells, into your future. They survived, barely, but survival is not the same as recovery. These men had reached into the dark and touched something ancient and indifferent. Something that had been placed on an unguarded truck, driven through civilian roads with no real protection and no real warning. And not a single institution responsible for that ever faced consequences. Here is what happened to the institutions responsible. Nothing. No criminal charges, no international sanctions, no public accountability from the hospital that loaded that canister onto an unguarded truck with inadequately warned drivers through civilian roads. The men who nearly died in that field, they recovered quietly, privately, without headlines or compensation or acknowledgement from the systems that failed them. They were scavengers who found the wrong truck on the wrong night, and the world treated them exactly like that. But the IAEA noticed, because this wasn't a freak accident. It was a warning, one that experts had been sending for years, and that governments had been quietly ignoring. Mexico was not the exception. Mexico was the example. Reviews were conducted, recommendations issued, protocols tightened on paper. But recommendations are not guarantees. They never were. That pellet was found in less than 24 hours. The system eventually worked. But somewhere right now, in a country you've never thought about, in a facility nobody is watching closely enough, there is another machine, another canister, another Cobalt 60 source sitting in the gap between what should happen and what actually does, waiting for another wrong truck, another wrong night, and the next people who find it won't know what they're holding either. If this video moved you, share it. One share puts this story in front of someone who has never heard it, someone who should. If those stories matter to you, subscribe, because the world has no shortage of invisible dangers, and someone has to keep telling the truth about them. What do you think should happen to the institutions responsible? Comment below. But before you leave, tap the video on your screen to discover about the nuclear bomb that fell on America.